And he also writes a great book on animal drawing, or I'm sorry, animal anatomy, which is not as comprehensive in any one animal as it is on the figure. And I think on the cover it's black and white, and it's a photograph of a man's back.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure to have that reference online for all those.
Okay.
But if you can send a link to it if you can find it. That would be
sure.
Great. Our next question is from Chris. Basically, Chris asks, since hands can be pretty expressive and also complex, any tips on how to simplify hands and feet too, for that matter?
For simplifying hands, I think there's a lot of different ways you can use. In the book, I try to show the same approach in primarily a gesture. And with the hands, I tend to group the middle 2 to 3 fingers with the wrist, especially the middle 2, like your middle finger and ring finger, as they tend to work collectively as kind of like a hook form. You can always find a nice gestural expression, and if we're talking about gesture, I'm thinking about, again, the C and the S curves, a way to unite those 2 fingers and the wrist. You can always find a C or an S curve that gives you a nice, great rhythmic relationship into the lower arm. And then from that point, I'm thinking about the, obviously the remaining fingers as additive gestures that can combine or kind of relate to what's already been done. The feet, I think, are, as far as gesture goes, a little bit simpler in that for the feet, I'm generally basing every position off of some variation of a triangle. I choose the triangle because it lends itself nicely to a simplified design for the foot. It's one of the more solid weight-bearing shapes in art, and so lends itself as a design solution well to the figure. And then we don't obviously have a great deal of expression in our foot for the ways that the toes are being used. So I generally talk about it as a sock shape. That's how I'll start the hand and the foot together, is imagining kind of more of that envelope idea, which is somewhat of a departure from the gesture of the figure. So, really good question. But I tend to kind of group from the outside in, still not a contour, but not as inside as the gesture of the figure may be with some of those more disparate lines.
All right, perfect, Michael. Our next question is from Victor. Victor says, great book, Michael, especially the first half of the upper torso construction portion. My question is, from a concept development student point of view, is your method of body constructive an effective approach to creating simple shapes and structure?
Well, first of all, I'm not a concept artist, so I'm probably not the best person to give you advice on what is the best approach used for developing a drawing for concept art. What I think that this approach is effective for is giving you a really solid idea of how to present three-dimensional form that can construct the figure. And what I think is valuable about that, especially if you learn that type of focused three-dimensional construction for perspective, is the interchangeability that it allows for. Is that I think it's maybe one of the better ways to draw, to analyze and investigate what you're seeing instead of just passively reproducing what's seen. And I think, and what I imagine, is that what's valuable for the concept artist is the ability to knock out just about anything that you can come up with in your head, or that someone like an art director is trying to get you to come up with. So I think this approach to drawing really facilitates that level of study. And it's a tool that I think will give you a great deal of knowledge in the representation of space and form through the figure, but also in beginning with a departure point that allow you to understand different forms through that same type of method, like, again, animals, and then the successive combination of animal and figure into any type of creature. The design of shape, absolutely. I mean, I think that to focus intently on anatomy as shape is something that's going to start to sensitize you to shape, and I think a really important equation of shape, which is something I see used quite a bit in concept design, which is the relationship of form and function. That those two things seem to have an intimate link in some of the more well-celebrated designs through whatever they elaborate on, be it archetype or shape psychology. And I think the human figure is one of the best places to really observe nature in those principles.
Thank you, Michael. And I wanted to basically say that, again, what Michael does demonstrate with his techniques are very applicable to, at least the technical and fundamental aspects of concept development. So it's a foundational source of just great information and technique, and it's applicable in just all areas of that. So to Victor, I think he answered it pretty good as well, and to carry further, I think you can pretty much use this as an amazing starting point going forward. But anyway, moving along, our next question is from Grace Spong. Basically, Grace says, I come from a very technical thinking background, so while memorizing muscles is easy for me, I have a hard time making things look natural. I guess she wants to know what your advice is for that. Like, what exercises would you recommend to make figures more fluid?
Well, I don't know. I think that's it's a big question. I think the obvious answer would just be draw a ton. That there is a certain amount of dexterity and naturalism that will come to your drawings the more that you do it. And that isn't to answer the question with a cop-out, as I know a lot of people just say draw all the time. I don't think that's actually helpful to draw without any type of program or idea of what you're drawing or why you're drawing. I don't think really will lead to a profound sense of improvement in your work. But I think that having posed that question, I think is a great place to start. I think if you can, maybe sometimes one of the hardest things to do is identify for yourself what the problem areas are in your drawing. So if you're aware of the fact that naturalism or fluidity in a figure is something that you find to have shortcomings in your work, then there's great ways to begin to solve that issue. I think the presentation I did in the workshop on gesture and kind of picking out some of those historical references are all artists that have been praised or celebrated for their naturalism. And one of the things that I try to demonstrate as being central to all of their practices is that curve, is that really their celebration and insistence on the rhythmic relationship of curve, the S curve, the C curve, and how they interchange in that dynamic asymmetry. So historically, the history of art would offer that for you. That's one solution to that feeling of naturalism. But it could be any number of things, and it would maybe require for me to really look at some of your drawings to make a good, more generous diagnosis of how I could help you out. But that's one place I would start.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for that answer. Our next question is from Raphael. He says, hi, Michael. Thanks for the amazing workshop. I'm learning to draw and just ordered your book. Do you have any advice for a very beginner student that wants to master anatomy and the human form? Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks. I'm glad the workshop was helpful. Again, the thing that I would give as beginning advice is the stuff that's the least fun and the least appealing to do, probably because it doesn't really offer the most kind of sexy result, which is just the perspective exercises. Like really training your hand to draw efficiently and consistently ellipses of any shape and size, spheres, boxes, cylinders. Again, I did try to make a point of that in the workshop too, and that's where it's at. I think that's probably the most important thing, and it's always the failing point of the students that I have in classes, is that that's just not something that is fundamentally understood, and more than just being understood, it's not something that can be practiced. As we all know, it's one thing to understand something, and it's one thing to implement it. So draw all the time, but with a purpose. Always be very conscious of what you're drawing and why, and I would highly recommend that all of your time be spent, at least to begin, analyzing and breaking things down into simple geometric forms and parts.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And again,